Hello, brains.
So I'm here doing something kind of interesting today that I've been wanting to do for a few years, which is get a psychological evaluation that tells me exactly where my cognitive strengths and challenges lie. I know I have ADHD. I've been diagnosed with ADHD since I was 12, well, ADD at the time. I've been re-diagnosed several times as an adult, but this is a step further, and I'm getting actual cognitive testing, which I have been intimidated about because I don't really know what to expect. I called in my buddy Patrick, who has been a consulting psychologist on this channel for like 5 years now, to pick his brain and ask him some questions. Speaking of evals, it can also be really helpful having someone that can evaluate my fitness needs and provide the encouragement I need to work out regularly, especially knowing how much better my brain works on the days that I do. CoPilot is one of the most important tools I use to accommodate my ADHD. My CoPilot coach regularly checks in to help me stick to my fitness goals in a way that would be nearly impossible on my own. You don't have to plan your workout or even choose what workout to do because your fitness coach does that for you. The workout is designed around equipment you already have, even if that's none. I've got some equipment at home, but I've also done a lot of body weight only workouts when I'm traveling. The last few weeks of finishing my book has been incredibly rewarding, but also really overwhelming. It can be hard to prioritize my workouts when I've got so much else going on and without pushing myself past my limits. But my coach has supported me in making sure I'm still taking care of my body and not falling out of the habit completely. As my coach says, nothing is too little, and she's provided me with some mobility exercises that include gentle stretching. It feels good that I can be so honest with her when I'm struggling, in fitness and in general, and receive the multiple reminders and flexibility I need without any judgment. Don't get me wrong, Chloe is a great workout partner, but even she needs a good nudge to get started. I hope I can get back to my regular workouts soon, but in the meantime, it's really nice knowing that I don't have to fit myself to my workouts. My CoPilot coach can tailor my workouts to me. If you'd like to try CoPilot, click my CoPilot link. go.mycopilot.com/how-2-ADHD to get a free trial with your own expert fitness and health coach. And now, back to the video. So first of all, I will let you introduce yourself. Who are you and what do you do?
Hi, I'm Dr. Patrick LeCount, a licensed psychologist specializing in working with adults, college students, high school age teens who have ADHD.
So one of the reasons that I haven't done this yet is because it's intimidating. I don't know what to expect. It's a little scary. Another reason is it's actually really expensive. It's like $3,000.
Yeah, it can be a couple $1,000s, yeah.
Yeah. So it's something that I didn't really have the money for until now. But I also, I didn't necessarily need it, I guess, because my ADHD was pretty clear. It wasn't that complicated to figure out like what it was that I was dealing with. But now I'm just like really curious. What is my working memory like? What is my IQ? Are they going to test for IQ? Like Like what kind of tests can I expect from this?
Yeah, so we typically will include some kind of IQ battery. So yeah, we'll get an overall estimate of your cognitive abilities. But in addition to that, that's made up of all these different, what we call indices. So there'll be, so indices, indexes, cognitive like components, I suppose. So like you mentioned, working memory, that's one of them. Processing speed, verbal comprehension, visual spatial reasoning, perceptual reasoning.
What would be like the equivalent of like D&D wisdom? Like in Dungeons and Dragons, like I'm supposed to test for wisdom. Do psychologists test for wisdom?
So give me I'm not familiar. I'm sorry, you got me on the spot here. We didn't learn that in grad school, but I'm ready to learn.
So in Dungeons and Dragons, there's different stats. Like you have Constitution and Charisma, and then you have like Intelligence, and then like Wisdom, which is like, are you gonna make good decisions? Like I feel like
we don't have that. That'd be a cool test though.
Well, so let me ask you a couple of basic questions. First of all, like what is a psychological evaluation, and who might get one?
So with the psychological evaluations, it can be a lot of things. There can be these tests for intellectual abilities, working memory, all those different cognitive components. But in addition to that, we might look at specific aspects of executive function. So set shifting, sustained attention, things like that. And beyond that, some people might add achievement testing. So if you're a school-age kid in particular, looking at achievement testing might be helpful to figure out if you have dyslexia, other specific learning disorders, whether it's writing, reading, math, things like that. But for adults, we don't typically do that because it's less relevant.
So who would it make sense to get one of these evaluations done?
For adults, I would argue most don't need it. And when I say that, diagnostically, if you just want to figure out, okay, do I have ADHD? Maybe that's the big question, or I'm struggling with these things in my life. What is going on? Really, the cognitive testing doesn't add any diagnostic utility. We've done research on that. It doesn't seem to add what we call predictive validity. So
meaning it's just as reliable to do the regular ADHD diagnosis thing as it is to do this to figure out if you have ADHD.
Right, yeah. So between rating scales, clinical interview, records review, kind of just past performance, stuff like that. It adds no significant degree.
So I'm about to spend a lot of money on something that's not actually all that useful. Is that what you're saying?
Well, I mean, and that's, when I have people approach me, I generally kind of dissuade them from it. Unless they just kind of want to know, how does my brain work?
I think for me, it's worth it because I do a lot of research on all this stuff, and I read about working memory, and I'm pretty sure at this point, my working memory is impaired. I think my processing speed is just fine or probably above average. I process really quickly. Pretty good understanding of my brain and how it works and how to work with it. And I'm a firm believer that you should know how a piece of equipment works that you're working with on any regular basis. And my brain is something that I work with all of the time. Yeah. So I'm I want to understand how it works, and I want to know if I'm right about how it works.
Sure.
I'm really curious. And also, my boyfriend had a full neuropsych eval because autism. So what's the difference between what I'm doing and what somebody who's going through a neuropsych evaluation for autism would go through?
Yeah, good question. So a neuropsych evaluation, first and foremost, has to be done by a neuropsychologist. A lot of people conflate the two as if they're the same. It's kind of like the joke of, I go to a psychologist and psychiatrist, and if you don't know the difference, then good for you, life is great. So it's there's a neuropsychologist. A lot of them typically will work in hospital settings, not all of them. We might do pre and post-op surgery, evaluations. I did some of that work for my resident year in Duke, where we did, some kiddos would come in, they had seizures and had cholecystectomies, and we wanted to see, okay, pre and post, or they went through chemo, stuff like that. So there's more of a medical component to it a lot of the times. And we might look at stuff more specifically, narrowed in on memory, specific aspects or locations of the brain that we know are associated with different functions that might be affected by a medical condition. And then with an autism eval specifically, there's a litany of other things. A lot of them will do different kind of standardized tests. It's a highly standardized test for social stuff. And, eye contact, prosody.
So I actually won't be tested to see if I'm if I have trouble picking up on social cues or something?
Most likely not, unless that was something you brought up.
What kind of tests can I expect? All I know is it's 6 hours worth of tests. Is that right? Seriously, 6 hours?
It depends. So there's some people that do kind of a more kitchen sink approach. So they do personality tests, achievement tests, cognitive tests, executive function tests. I think a lot of people do that. Some agencies do that because it helps. It's more stuff to bill, frankly. It's not terribly useful, in my opinion.
It's not terribly useful because the test isn't useful, or because there's no reason to suspect I have a personality disorder?
So it's what's the referral question is kind of how we phrase it professionally is, yes, there's all these things, but why is this person coming here? Okay, maybe it's ADHD, maybe they're struggling at work or relationships, lost a job, they're treated for depression, but their psychiatrist now thinks that maybe this is ADHD. There's all these different things. So depending on the referral question, that's why I spend 15, 20 minutes when someone calls me, just really getting an understanding, how did you end up here? So we can make sure we get you in the right place.
Will it pick up on other stuff? So if I'm dealing with, I have generalized anxiety disorder as well, will that show up on the testing, or is it just going to show me ADHD specific stuff?
Part of the testing is we document what are called behavioral observations. So these are things that we observe in the test that there's no concrete measure for them, but they might be diagnostic. So for example, with a lot of individuals with ADHD, it might be things like careless errors. They didn't wait until I finished reading the instructions to start the problem. If I'm doing a task that involves giving them blocks, they want to reach for the blocks. They want to turn pages for me. They might be squirming in their seat. Those type of things might be indicative of something. So for generalized anxiety, one thing we might get for teenagers and adults that I see is what we call reassurance seeking. So did I get that right? How am I doing? Is this okay? When we get to the clinical interview part of the assessment, we might want to ask clarification about those things.
Okay, so there is a clinical interview part as well?
Yeah, every clinic does a little bit differently. I break it up across 2 days because of time, and also energy. Cognitive testing, it's tiring. We'll have that day, get some objective measures, but then in addition to that, it's going through, okay, how did we get here? The way I phrase it to people is, I want to figure out, yes, diagnostically what's going on, but also what is causing, maintaining, and exacerbating the things that brought you here. What's contributing to that? So then when we get into treatment recommendations, which is kind of like the last part of the report, we can tailor those a little bit more.
That's what I was going to ask. Other than me knowing just generally better how my brain works, what do I get out of this? And it sounds like I would get treatment recommendations where they're like, okay, it sounds like you've been doing really well with this, but what kind of treatment recommendations would there be?
Yeah, so they vary. So it might be a specific therapeutic approach. For adults with ADHD, it might be cognitive behavioral therapy that includes some skills-based components. It might be a mindfulness-based approach if there's a lot of emotional lability. I've been liking that approach a bit more recently, actually, in our practice. But in addition to that, it might be school work accommodations and supports. I'll try to tailor it to the individual, but sometimes it's just a laundry list for things that you could, ask your provider.
What happens if I get super overwhelmed, emotionally or something, and cognitive function shuts down? Do I keep going with the test or do I ask for a break?
Good question. Yeah, tell the examiner. They'll be able to help gauge okay, we're gonna pause, or oh, we've only got this much left to do, or let's do one more, because that's also diagnostic. We also, again, we want to get the best picture possible.
What can I bring with me? Can I bring a cozy blanket? Can I bring fidget?
Generally speaking, no, to all of those things.
No, to all of that, no.
Things.
You must be miserable and uncomfortable during the test, as if you were in college.
And that's part of it too, is these tests are highly standardized. So far as okay, are you right or left hand dominated? Which side do I place the blocks? Which side do I put the stimulus book, is kind of what we call it, to show you things. It's highly standardized. And if you took longer to do a certain task that requires your hands because you were playing with something in your hands, even if it's well, that helps me a little bit.
Are the tests timed? Is there a time limit?
Some of them are. Certain subtests are. And, usually the examiner will tell you either do this as quickly as possible. Do you have an answer yet? They might have a timer out. They might say, this is going to take X amount of minutes.
I'm excited. Is there anything that you would advise going in to get the most accurate results?
Be healthy. So if you're sick, you woke up sick, tell them, reschedule. Try to get a good night's rest. Bring some snacks with you, maybe some water.
Do I take my meds?
Good question. So again, kind of getting back to that, what is the referral question? Well, I would just ask you, are you interested in understanding, what your cognitive performance is like when you're on your meds, or your cognitive performance when you're not on your meds?
I mean, for me, it's both, right? Because I want to know where my impairments lie when I'm on my meds, because that's usually what I do at work, right? I'm usually on my meds. But at the same time, there's always that question in the back of my head, do I actually need these? Is it important? So I think knowing my baseline, off meds, might help me understand why I do in fact need to take meds.
Yeah. And in an ideal world, we would be able to do, okay, one day we're going to have you unmedicated, we're going to do all these tests, and then another day, maybe a week later, we're going to have you do them all over again. The problem is most of the tests that psychologists will administer, typically they say we need to have a year in between administrations to protect against what we call test retest, or testing effects rather.
Where I have already taken that test and I know the answers?
Yeah, there's maybe some evidence to suggest you would improve upon your performance simply because you've taken it recently. There are some tests, however, that are resistant to that. There's a task we call a continuous performance test, or task that we might administer where, one day you come in, you do the test, it's computerized, and then another day you come in, again, one day you have your meds, one day you don't, and we could compare those scores, and because it's resistant to that testing effect.
All right. Well, I will go do the thing and talk to you when it's back. Only it'll be probably in the same video, so you don't have to wait as long as I do to find out how this went. All right. Let's do it. So unfortunately, we lost the files of my wrap-up explaining this experience, and I can't remember where I put the original footage. So I'm going to recap here with as much as I can remember. If you're thinking of taking one of these tests for yourself, Patrick said it best.
What's the referral question? Why is this person coming here?
So check first to see if it even makes sense for you, since these tests are not cheap. This battery of tests will give you a deeper understanding of how your brain works differently, but a typical ADHD evaluation is all that's needed for a diagnosis for ADHD. As for my personal experience, this test was really fascinating. I'm glad that I did it. It is tiring, so do make sure you bring water for yourself, make sure you eat. They are really looking to evaluate you. It's also a pretty frustrating experience, so be prepared for that because you really want to do well. You want to do well on the test, and they're intentionally designed in a way that really tests your limits. I'm still waiting for my report, but it was pretty clear some tests I did way better on than others, and working memory is definitely a relative area of weakness for me. It was nice to have that validation. I was pretty sure, but it was nice to have the validation. I also did slightly better than I expected on a couple of the tests, including one that I think measures pattern recognition. I'll let you know when I get the final report. In the meantime, if there's anything I've learned, both from my experience taking tests like these and from that of friends and speaking with this community, it's that if you're struggling, there's a reason you're struggling. Whether you have a diagnosis or specific tests validating those struggles, if you're having trouble with something, it's okay to find coping strategies that help minimize your impairments and let you lean into your strengths so that you can work with your brain, not against it. We already have a bunch of resources on our channel. Check them out, and I will be adding more soon. Thank you to my brain advocates and all my Patreon brains for making it so I could take this evaluation. I'm able to learn so much more about my brain now and share those experiences with you because of it. So thank you. If you like this episode and you want to support us on Patreon, you can do that. We'll put that in the description below. And if you want to check out Patrick's practice, did you want to go ahead and share really quickly about that?
Yeah, so Practical Psychological Services. I've got a license now to practice in 30 plus states for therapy, for diagnostic assessments, and then later this year, actually probably the time when this video comes out, having some groups, some virtual groups available for mindfulness-based interventions and cognitive behavioral therapy for young adults and adults with ADHD.
Like, subscribe, click all the things, and I will see you next video. You want to do bye brains with me?
Yeah.
All right, 1, 2, 3. Bye brains. Oh, and if you want to try out CoPilot, again, links in the description.